Welcome to Dreamy Mystery. Here's what makes no sense about the Sumerian King List, and why it holds a secret that has baffled historians for over a century. Imagine, if you will, a meticulous record, etched into clay prisms and tablets millennia ago, detailing the rulers of the world's first great civilization. It's not a myth or a poem, it's a king list. A chronological account. It names cities, it names kings, and it records the precise length of their reigns. So far, so normal, right? But then you look closer at the numbers, and your brain does a double take. The first king of Eridu, Alulim, supposedly ruled for 28,800 years. His successor, Alalgar, for 36,000 years. Enmenlu-Anna, another early monarch, for a staggering 43,200 years. We're not talking about a few long-lived individuals here. We're talking about reigns that stretch across geological epochs, dwarfing the entire span of recorded human history. This isn't some fringe conspiracy theory. It's written directly into one of the most important ancient documents we possess. How could any human being, or even a succession of them, rule for such an impossible duration? Was it a scribal error? A symbolic gesture? Or does it hint at a truth about early Sumerian kingship that we've deliberately misunderstood, or perhaps were meant to misunderstand? This contradiction, this impossible span of rule, is the beating heart of a mystery that hints at an entirely different understanding of the origins of civilization, and perhaps of humanity itself. It suggests that the history we think we know is only a fraction of the story, and that something profound, something almost unbelievable, lies hidden in plain sight within these ancient cuneiform wedges. If you're enjoying this journey through history, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And I'm always curious. Drop a comment letting me know what city and time zone you're watching from. There's something special about knowing this story is reaching people all over the world, even as we delve into the deepest past. Let's start with the obvious question nobody asks. How could a king rule for 36,000 years? This isn't just a typo on an ancient tablet, a momentary lapse of an overworked scribe. It's a deliberate, repeated assertion, meticulously carved into clay, preserved for millennia. We're talking about numbers that define not just human lifespan, but the very concept of historical time as we understand it. This isn't a poem, it's a list, a record, and it begins with a proclamation. Kingship descended from heaven, and with that divine mandate came reigns of impossible length, a puzzle piece that simply doesn't fit into our conventional historical timeline. The Sumerian King List is not a single document, but a collection of ancient texts, primarily clay tablets and prisms, discovered across various archaeological sites in Mesopotamia, particularly Larsa and Nippur over the last century and a half. The most famous example is the Weldblundel prism, housed today in the Ashmolean Museum at the University of Oxford. Discovered in 1922 during excavations at Larsa, this four-sided clay prism stands nearly 8 inches tall and is inscribed with 2 columns of cuneiform text on each face, detailing the names of kings, their cities, and their regnal years, stretching from the mythical beginnings of kingship down to the early 2nd millennium BCE. Its purpose was clear: to establish a continuous, legitimate lineage of rulers, linking the present to a divinely ordained past. It's a political document as much as a historical one, laying claim to a heritage of power. But the moment you begin to read it, the numbers jump out. The very first city listed, Eridu, is introduced as the seat of kingship when kingship descended from heaven. Its first king, Alulim, ruled for 28,800 years. His successor, Alalgar, ruled for 36,000 years. Then came Enmenluana of Bad Tibira ruling for 43,200 years, followed by Enmen-Galana from the same city for 28,800 years. The pattern continues. Dumuzid, the shepherd, also of Bad Tibira, ruled for 36,000 years. These are not isolated anomalies. They are the standard for the 8 kings listed before a cataclysmic event. In total, these 8 antediluvian, or before the flood, kings are said to have reigned for a combined 241,200 years, according to the Weld Blundell prism. It's a colossal sum, a duration so immense it makes the entire recorded history of human civilization, from the first cities to the present day, seem like a mere blink. To the Sumerians, the concept of kingship descending from heaven wasn't just a poetic flourish. It was the foundation of their political and social order. It meant that the authority to rule was not a human invention, but a divine gift, bestowed upon a chosen city and its ruler. This kingship wasn't static, it moved. When one city's power waned, or its king's legitimacy was challenged, kingship would be carried to another city. This explains the King List structure, a succession of cities, each holding the singular divine kingship for a period, before it moved on to the next. It's a narrative of continuous legitimate rule, even as power shifted across the Mesopotamian plains. Imagine the scribes who meticulously etched these numbers into wet clay. They weren't ignorant of the passage of time or the human lifespan. They were the highly educated elite of their society, trained in mathematics, astronomy, and literature. They understood years, decades, centuries, so that when they inscribed 28,800 years for a single king, they did so with purpose. The cuneiform script itself, a monumental innovation, allowed for precise record keeping. Each wedge, each mark was deliberate. This wasn't a casual jotting, these were formal official state records. The clay prisms, often crafted with exquisite care, were designed to be durable, to be preserved. They were declarations, not just historical accounts. What did these numbers mean to them? Was it a literal historical claim suggesting a vastly different form of human existence in the primordial past? Or was it a symbolic representation of the Ein favor of an age when the gods walked closer to humanity and their chosen rulers partook in their immortality? The sheer scale of the numbers forces us to consider that our modern, literal interpretation might be missing a crucial layer of meaning. Crucially, the King List itself marks a distinct turning point in this narrative. The flood swept over, and after the flood swept over, kingship descended from heaven a second time. This single line divides the antediluvian kings, with their impossible reigns, from the post-diluvian kings, whose reigns, while still sometimes long by modern standards, become progressively more plausible. The city of Eridu, the first seat of kingship, holds a special place in Sumerian mythology as the oldest city, home to the god Enki, god of wisdom and water. Archaeological excavations at Eridu have indeed revealed layers of continuous settlement dating back to the Ubaid period, around 5400 BCE, with a succession of temples built one upon another, suggesting its profound antiquity and enduring religious significance. This grounding of the mythical in physical reality only deepens the mystery of its earliest rulers. The King List is not just a fantasy, it's rooted in tangible places and traditions. After the Great Flood, the King List names the first dynasty of Kish as the next recipient of kingship from heaven. Here, the reigns begin to shorten dramatically. While still lengthy compared to modern monarchs, Enmennuina of Kish, for example, is credited with 660 years, and Calibum with 960 years, they are a stark contrast to the tens of thousands of years of their predecessors. Etana, the shepherd who ascended to heaven and consolidated all foreign lands, ruled for 150 years. These are still extraordinary durations, hinting at a different perception of time or perhaps a different form of rule in the early post-flood era. But they are a step closer to human scale, a bridge between the mythical past and the discernible historical period. The King List continues, tracing the movement of kingship from Kish to Uruk, then to Ur, and so on, through various dynasties, eventually reaching historically verifiable rulers like Gilgamesh of Uruk, who ruled for 26 years according to the list, and the kings of the third dynasty of Ur, whose reigns align with archaeological and epigraphic evidence. The enigma of the antediluvian kings, therefore, isn't just a curiosity. It's a fundamental challenge to our understanding of early civilization. What changed after the flood? Did human lifespans drastically shorten, or did the nature of kingship itself transform? And why would the Sumerians include such seemingly absurd data in what was otherwise a serious historical and political document? Was it a way to establish an almost unimaginable antiquity and divine legitimacy for their rule? Or was there something else, something literally hidden in the depths of their understanding that we've yet to uncover? But that's a story for the next chapter, as we delve into the various theories that attempt to unravel the meaning behind these impossible reigns and what they might truly reveal about the kings they tried to hide. We stand before the well-Blundell prism, you and I, staring at those impossible numbers. The air in this imagined space, perhaps a hushed museum gallery or a dimly lit study, feels heavy with the weight of millennia. My gaze traces the intricate cuneiform script, each wedge-shaped mark a testament to an ancient intellect, a deliberate act of recording. It's not just a slab of clay, it's a portal, a frozen moment from the dawn of civilization. Alulim, 800 years. Alalga, 6,000 years. 8 kings, 241, 200 years. The sheer scale of it is mind-boggling, isn't it? A faint tremor of disbelief runs through me each time I read them, a feeling I imagine you share. It challenges everything we think we know about the dawn of civilization, about the very nature of human existence. Our modern minds, accustomed to lifespans measured in decades, struggle to even conceptualize a single reign stretching for millennia. It's like trying to grasp the size of a galaxy by holding a pebble. So what are we looking at here? Is this simply myth? Fanciful tales woven by ancient storytellers to entertain their people around flickering oil lamps, perhaps exaggerated to impress or to instill a sense of the divine in their rulers? Or is there something far deeper, a hidden layer of truth embedded within these meticulously carved cuneiform symbols? You see, this isn't some fringe conspiracy theory or a wild interpretation of vague scripture pulled from obscure texts. No, this isn't the ramblings of an internet pundit. This is a foundational document, a historical record revered by the Sumerians themselves, penned by their most educated scribes. These were the intellectual elite of their time, the keepers of knowledge, the engineers of their society. And these scribes, as we've established, were not prone to casual error when it came to their most sacred records. They understood the gravity of their task, the enduring legacy of the words they etched into big clay. Think about it for a moment. Picture a Sumerian scribe, perhaps a man named Enlil-Bani, hunched over a damp clay tablet in a sun-drenched courtyard, his reed stylus poised. He's not idly doodling. He's a master of his craft, trained from childhood in the labyrinthine script, in mathematics, in astronomy. The Sumerians invented writing, giving humanity one of its most powerful tools. They developed complex mathematics, not just for counting, but for intricate calculations that allowed them to build monumental ziggurats that touched the heavens and to manage vast irrigation systems that transformed arid lands into fertile bread baskets. They developed sophisticated administrative systems, creating the first bureaucracies to govern bustling city-states. They were precise. They measured their fields with ropes and calculations, tracked their harvests with meticulous ledgers, catalogued their laws, like the famous Code of Ur-Nammu predating Hammurabi, and charted the heavens with astonishing accuracy, predicting celestial events that still impress astronomers today. Why, then, would such a practical, detail-oriented culture suddenly abandon all logic, all their ingrained precision, when recording the reigns of their earliest, most important kings? It's a question that gnaws at the edges of accepted history, isn't it? It just doesn't add up. I can almost hear a modern historian muttering, tapping a pen against the ancient text. And yet, there it is, undeniable. This isn't a whimsical poem designed to evoke emotion or paint a picturesque scene. It's a list, a king list. Its very format suggests historical intent. A lineage to be followed, a chronology to be understood. It's structured, methodical, almost bureaucratic in its presentation. And here's where it truly becomes fascinating. It blends these impossibly long reigns with later, more plausible ones that seamlessly transition into verifiable historical figures. One moment you're reading about a king who ruled for tens of thousands of years, and the next you encounter a king whose reign is a mere few decades, a span that perfectly aligns with archaeological and historical records. This deliberate juxtaposition demands our attention, doesn't it? It forces us to ask, what changed so dramatically that rulers went from virtually immortal to distinctly mortal? And more importantly, what did these numbers mean to the Sumerians themselves? They must have perceived this shift with a sense of profound reverence, perhaps even melancholia, for a lost golden age. You might initially think, as many do when first confronted with these figures, that perhaps these years weren't our modern 365-day years. This is a natural instinct, a way for our minds to try and rationalize the irrational. Maybe they were lunar cycles or shorter seasons, or some other ancient calendrical unit. A localized system of timekeeping we no longer understand, but even if we were to drastically shorten the definition of a year, the numbers remain astronomically high, defying any simple reinterpretation. If a year was a month, Alulim still ruled for 2400 years. That's longer than the entire recorded history of many civilizations. If a year was a day, he ruled for nearly 80 years, which, while plausible for a human lifespan, doesn't explain the 36,000-year reigns of his successors. And what about the cumulative total of over 240,000 years for just 8 kings? The sheer magnitude of these durations transcends any simple redefinition of time units. It's the scale that defies explanation, not just the label. The numbers are simply too large, too consistent in their impossibility across multiple entries to be dismissed by a simple calendrical trick. No, this isn't a trick of translation or a misinterpretation of calendrical systems. The Sumerian scribes were quite capable of expressing different units of time. They had words for days, months, seasons, and years, and thus they used them with clarity. When they meant year, they meant it in a way that aligns with our understanding of a full earthly cycle. The problem isn't the unit, it's the impossible duration of those units. The scribes knew exactly what they were writing. They weren't confused, they were conveying something extraordinary. So if it's not a mistake and it's not a different calendrical system, then what are these numbers? They're a statement. A profound, deliberate statement about the nature of early kingship and the beings who held it. Remember that crucial phrase etched before the first king's name, the kingship descended from heaven. This isn't just a poetic flourish, a flowery way of saying a king was divinely chosen. It's a declaration of divine origin, a direct, tangible link between the rulers and the celestial realm, a connection to a source of power beyond human comprehension. It implies a true, literal descent, as if something from the heavens physically took up residence on earth. When kingship descended from heaven, it wasn't just a symbolic transfer of power. It implied a fundamental shift in the very fabric of leadership, perhaps even in the nature of the beings who first held that power. These antediluvian kings, with their multi-millennial reigns, were not simply long-lived humans. That's too simplistic, too mundane. They were something else entirely. They were the intermediaries, the direct representatives of the heavens on earth, perhaps even beings from the heavens themselves. Their extraordinary lifespans, therefore, become a testament to their divine connection, their non-human, or at least superhuman status. Imagine, if you will, beings whose very essence was tied to a different temporal dimension, whose lifespans mirrored the slow, majestic cycles of the cosmos, rather than the fleeting pulse of human existence. Their presence would have radiated undeniable authority, a wisdom accumulated over ages, a link to the very origins of the world. We see echoes of this concept in other ancient traditions, don't we? Think of the patriarchs in the Hebrew Bible, figures like Methuselah, who lived for 969 years. While not on the breathtaking scale of the Sumerian kings, these accounts share a common thread: a primordial era when beings lived for vastly extended periods, an era that abruptly ended, often with a catastrophic end. Even in ancient Egyptian king lists, there are references to divine dynasties and gods who ruled on earth for immense periods before human pharaohs took the throne. The Sumerian King List, however, takes this concept to an unprecedented level of precision and scale, presenting it not as a mythical narrative but as a historical record, a chronological sequence intended to be taken literally. It's not a story, it's a ledger of impossibilities. The scribes who meticulously inscribed these names and numbers on clay prisms and tablets weren't just recording history, they were preserving a truth, a memory of a time when the world was different, when kingship was infused with a power and longevity we can barely comprehend today. I picture them, their faces serious, their hands steady, knowing they were committing something extraordinary to posterity. They understood the profound significance of these numbers, and they intended for us, thousands of years later, to grapple with their meaning, to look beyond the obvious and consider the implications. They were not trying to deceive, they were trying to inform, to transmit a legacy. What was the purpose of creating such a list? For the Sumerians, the king list served several vital functions. It legitimized the rule of current kings by tracing their lineage back to these divinely appointed, impossibly ancient predecessors. Our king, they could declare, is descended from those who ruled for tens of thousands of years, those upon whom kingship descended directly from heaven. What greater claim to authority could there be? It provided a coherent narrative of their origins, anchoring their civilization in a deep sacred past, giving them a profound sense of continuity and purpose. It was a way of connecting their present to a golden age, a time when the gods walked among them, and kings ruled with a power and longevity that defied human limitations. It was their sacred history, their foundation myth, presented as undeniable fact. But beyond legitimacy and historical narrative, there's a palpable sense of awe, isn't there? A profound respect for a past that was fundamentally different from their present. And this brings us back to the flood. The King List tells us that after the flood swept over the land, kingship descended from heaven a second time. This cataclysmic event wasn't just a natural disaster, it was a cosmic reset. It marked a clear dividing line between two distinct eras, a temporal chasm separating the impossibly ancient from the merely ancient. The world as they knew it was fundamentally transformed. Before the flood, kings ruled for tens of thousands of years. After the flood, while still remarkable, the reigns were significantly shorter, eventually becoming plausible. What was it about the flood that fundamentally altered the nature of kingship, human lifespan, or even the very fabric of reality? Did the flood cleanse the world of something, a lingering divine essence that enabled such longevity? Or did it introduce a new set of parameters for existence, a cosmic barrier that separated humanity from its superhuman past? The text offers no explanation, only the stark fact of the change, a silent testament to a world reborn under different rules. This isn't just about ancient numbers on a clay tablet. This is about a hidden history, a suppressed truth that challenges our modern understanding of early civilization, of our own origins, and of the true nature of power and longevity. The Sumerian scribes in their wisdom left us a puzzle piece, a massive, gleaming, impossible puzzle piece inscribed with numbers that defy logic. And it's up to us to figure out where it fits in the grand tapestry of human history, to resist the urge to simply dismiss it as myth and instead confront the profound implications of its message. We've established the what and begun to explore the why of these impossible durations. But the deeper question remains. Who were these kings? What was their true nature? And what does their story reveal about the true nature of the kingship from heaven that preceded our recorded history? The implications, as we are about to discover, are far more profound than any simple myth could convey. They hint at a past that is both alien and intimately connected to our present, a past that demands we rethink everything we thought we knew. You're still reeling, aren't you? That staggering number, 241,000 years for just 8 kings, all before a cataclysmic flood. It's a punch to the gut of everything we thought we knew. You look at those figures etched into ancient clay, and your mind struggles to reconcile them with the neat linear progression of history we've been taught. It feels impossible, surreal, and yet, there it is, a historical document, meticulously crafted by highly educated scribes. So what are we to make of this? This isn't some fleeting whisper in the archaeological winds. It's a deliberate, repeated assertion across multiple copies of the Sumerian King List. The Weld-Blundell prism isn't alone in its testimony. Other fragments and tablets corroborate these astonishing durations. We're not dealing with a single, isolated anomaly here. This is a consistent, foundational claim from the very dawn of written history. Naturally, the first instinct for anyone confronted with such an extraordinary claim is to seek a rational, digestible explanation. You might be asking yourself, as countless historians and scholars have before us, could it be a mistake? Perhaps a miscalculation, a scribal error, a simple slip of the stylus? But we've already touched on the almost obsessive precision of Sumerian record-keeping, haven't we? These weren't illiterate peasants scratching random symbols into wet clay. These were the intellectual elite, the guardians of knowledge, the architects of the written word itself. Their mathematical systems, their astronomical observations, their legal codes, they all speak to an unparalleled level of accuracy for their time. To assume such monumental errors in their most sacred historical document, especially one detailing the very foundation of their kingship, feels like a disservice to their profound intellect. Then there's the question of the year. Could their year have been different? Perhaps a lunar cycle, a season, or some other shorter unit of time we no longer understand? This is a popular theory, one that attempts to shrink those impossible durations into something more human-sized. If, for example, a year in Sumerian terms was actually just a month, then Alulim's 28,800 years would shrink to a mere 2,400 years. Still an incredibly long reign, certainly, but perhaps within the realm of the mythic rather than the utterly absurd. But here's where that theory, while tempting, begins to unravel. We need to look at the whole king list, not just the antediluvian section. After the Great Flood, after kingship descended from heaven a second time, the reigns of kings become progressively shorter. We see durations like 200 years, then 900 years, then 400 years, and eventually we arrive at historically verifiable kings whose reigns are measured in decades, 36 years, 25 years, 7 years. These later kings, like Gilgamesh, are figures we can place within a more conventional historical timeline, their reigns aligning with what we understand as human lifespans. If the Sumerian year was a shorter unit of time for Alulim and his brethren, why would it abruptly revert to our modern understanding of a year after the flood? Why would the scribes suddenly switch their calendrical system without any indication, just as the reigns became more plausible? It's an arbitrary shift that lacks internal consistency within the document itself. The king list gives us a continuous, unbroken narrative of kingship, using what appears to be a consistent unit of time, even as the durations themselves undergo a radical transformation. This inconsistency is precisely what makes the shorter year theory difficult to fully embrace. So if not a mistake and not a different kind of year, what then? Many scholars lean towards the idea of symbolic numbers. This theory posits that these immense durations aren't meant to be taken literally at all. Instead, they represent something else entirely. The profound antiquity of kingship, the divine favour bestowed upon these early rulers, or perhaps even a mythical golden age where life itself was simply different, grander, more eternal. The numbers, in this view, are not chronological facts, but rather theological or philosophical statements, designed to imbue the institution of kingship with an almost unfathomable legitimacy. We see symbolic numbers in many ancient cultures, don't we? The Bible, for instance, uses numbers like 40 or 7 to convey completeness or significant periods. So it's a perfectly reasonable line of inquiry. Perhaps 28,800 years for Alulim isn't a literal count, but rather a way of saying this king ruled for an incredibly divinely long time, a time beyond human comprehension. But again, we must press deeper. If these numbers are purely symbolic, why the specificity? Why 28,800, 36,000, 43,200, or 64,800 years? Why not simply thousands of years, or eons, or an eternity? The very precision of these seemingly impossible figures seems to defy a purely symbolic interpretation. It's as if the scribes are trying to tell us something exact, even if that exactness pushes the boundaries of our understanding. They are not merely stating very long, they are stating how long, with a mathematical specificity that is hard to dismiss as mere poetic license. And once more, the flood acts as our great divider. If the numbers are symbolic, why does the symbolism suddenly change so drastically after the deluge? Why does the symbol of kingship's longevity suddenly deflate from tens of thousands of years to mere hundreds, then dozens? It suggests a fundamental shift in the nature of kingship, or perhaps even the nature of existence itself, rather than just a change in symbolic language. This brings us to a more unsettling and perhaps more intriguing possibility. What if the Sumerian scribes, those meticulous record keepers, those intellectual giants of the ancient world, meant what they said? What if these numbers, as incredible as they seem, were intended to be literal? This is where the narrative shifts from puzzling historical anomaly to profound existential mystery. If we allow ourselves, just for a moment, to entertain the idea that Alulim literally ruled for 28,800 years, and his successors for similar durations, then we are forced to confront a reality that is utterly alien to our modern understanding. Think about it. Kingship descended from heaven. This isn't just a poetic flourish, it's a statement of origin, a declaration that these rulers were not merely human. If they were divine beings, or beings of a different order of existence, then our assumptions about lifespan and time might simply not apply to them. We are talking about an era where the laws of biology, as we understand them, might have been fundamentally different. The Sumerian King List then becomes more than just a historical document. It becomes a testament to a lost age, a forgotten epoch where the very fabric of reality was distinct from our own. It speaks of a time before the flood, a cosmic demarcation point that wasn't just a geographical disaster, but a reset button for existence itself. After the waters receded, after kingship descended from heaven a second time, humanity as we know it began, with its finite lifespans and its struggles within the confines of our familiar reality. The scribes, in their wisdom, weren't just recording history, they were encoding a profound truth about the past, a truth that distinguished the nature of these pre-flood rulers from all who came after. They were telling us that the first kings were not like us, they were something other, and this otherness was intrinsically tied to their impossible longevity. This isn't some fringe conspiracy theory. This is a direct engagement with the primary source material, asking the uncomfortable questions it forces us to confront. We are not dismissing the efforts of conventional scholarship. Rather, we are pushing beyond their current limitations, guided by the very words of the ancient Sumerians themselves. We are trying to understand their perspective, to peer through their eyes into the abyss of deep time. The real mystery, then, isn't just what these numbers mean, but why the Sumerians felt it so crucial to record them this way. What message were they so desperate to transmit across the millennia? What fundamental truth about our origins, about the nature of power, and about the very definition of humanity did they believe these numbers held? As we delve deeper into this incredible king list, we are not just exploring ancient history, we are challenging the very foundations of our understanding of time, life, and the origins of civilization itself. We are standing at the precipice of a revelation, a truth that has been hidden in plain sight for thousands of years, patiently waiting for us to truly listen. And in the next chapter, we will begin to consider who these beings might have been, these antediluvian rulers whose reigns defy all logic and yet are meticulously recorded as history. Prepare yourself, because the implications are truly staggering. We stand, you and I, at a precipice. We've looked squarely at the impossible numbers etched into the clay of the Sumerian King List: 28,800 years for Alulim, 36,000 for Alalga, and so on, accumulating to a staggering 241,200 years of rule before the Great Flood. We've dismissed the easy answers, the comforting academic dismissals of scribal error or symbolic fluff, because, as we've seen, the evidence simply doesn't support them. The scribes were too precise, too deliberate, too consistent. So what if we take them at their word? What if the Sumerian King List isn't some allegorical poem, but a literal historical record, as the Sumerians themselves intended it to be? This is where the ground shifts beneath our feet, isn't it? This is where the story of humanity, as we've been taught it, begins to fray at the edges. If these reigns were literal, then the beings who held the scepter in ancient Sumer were not human as we understand humanity. They were something else entirely, something profound, something ancient, something almost alien. Think about it with me. When the King List opens with that resonant declaration, "Kingship descended from heaven," it's not just a poetic flourish. It's a statement of origin. It's a direct answer to the question, where did these rulers come from? They didn't rise from the mortal ranks of men. They came down. From where? From the heavens. This isn't just a divine right to rule. It's a divine origin of the rulers themselves. Imagine a world where kings were not born of women, but descended from a realm beyond our skies, imbued with a lifespan that defies our biological understanding. What kind of world would that be? What would it mean for the people who lived under such rule? For 200 years, the Sumerian King List tells us, these extraordinary beings governed the cradle of civilization. This isn't just about longevity, it's about a fundamental difference in being. Our modern minds, steeped in scientific materialism, struggle to reconcile such concepts. We are conditioned to think in terms of human lifespans, human capabilities, human limitations. But the Sumerian scribes, those meticulous record keepers, those keepers of ancient wisdom, were operating from a different paradigm. They were recording a history that predates our current understanding of reality. We're not talking about a few extra years or even a few centuries. We're talking about millennia, stretching into what feels like geological time for a single ruler. A Lulim, ruling for 800 years, would have seen entire epochs pass. He would have witnessed the slow, almost imperceptible shifts of continents, the rise and fall of countless generations of his subjects, the evolution of language, the invention of agriculture, the very dawn of settled life. What kind of wisdom would such a being possess? What kind of perspective? The very concept challenges our perception of progress. If a single king ruled for tens of thousands of years, how would innovation occur? Would there even be innovation in the way we understand it, driven by the urgency of fleeting human lives? Or would knowledge be absolute, dictated from above, perfected over unfathomable spans of time? Perhaps, under such rulers, society achieved a stable, almost static perfection, guided by beings who had seen it all, knew it all, and had no need for trial and error. And then, the flood, the great cosmic reset. The King List explicitly marks this cataclysmic event, stating, "Then the flood swept over, and after the flood had swept over, and the kingship had descended from heaven a second time, the kingship was in Kish." This isn't just a natural disaster, it's a clear demarcation point, a rupture in the fabric of existence. Before the flood, kings ruled for tens of thousands of years. After the flood, kingship descends again, but the reigns are dramatically, almost instantly shorter. Enmen-Luana of Kish, the first post-flood king, rules for 200 years. Still impossibly long by our standards, but a mere blink compared to his antediluvian predecessors. And then, the reigns progressively shorten, becoming more and more recognizable until we arrive at rulers whose lifespans are historically plausible. What happened? What did the flood change? Did it alter the very nature of life on Earth? Did it cleanse the world not just of humanity, but of the very conditions that allowed these immensely long-lived beings to exist and rule? Did it signify a shift in the cosmic order, a severing of the direct link between heaven and earth that these antediluvian kings embodied? The Sumerian scribes, in their meticulous record-keeping, are not just listing names and numbers, they are painting a picture of two distinct eras of existence. An era before the flood, characterized by divine kings of impossible longevity, and an era after the flood where kingship, though still descended from heaven, was now held by beings whose lifespans were drastically diminished, gradually aligning with what we understand as human. This isn't about some obscure historical footnote. This is about rewriting the prologue to human civilization. If the first rulers of Earth were not human, if they were beings of immense power and lifespan, then our origins, our history, our very place in the cosmos takes on an entirely new meaning. We are not just talking about a hidden truth. We are talking about a foundational truth that has been obscured, perhaps intentionally, perhaps simply by the passage of time and the erosion of understanding. The Sumerian King List, this seemingly simple catalogue of rulers, becomes a Rosetta Stone for a forgotten age. It's a tantalizing whisper from the deepest past, telling us that the story we know is incomplete. It's a challenge to our assumptions, a call to look beyond the conventional narratives and consider the truly extraordinary. We are left with profound questions. Who were these beings, really? The Anunnaki come to mind for many, but the King List simply states kingship descended from heaven. What was their purpose in establishing civilization? Were they benevolent guides, powerful overseers, or something else entirely? And why did their reigns end so abruptly, so decisively with the deluge? This isn't some fringe conspiracy theory that asks you to ignore evidence. This is about heeding the evidence, taking the ancient record seriously and allowing it to guide our inquiry. We are not inventing stories. We are attempting to understand the story that the most ancient, educated people on Earth chose to record, preserve, and pass down. They were telling us something vital, something that baffled even the early modern historians who first uncovered these texts. The Weld-Blundell prism with its crisp cuneiform isn't just an artifact in a museum. It's a direct message from the ancient world asking us to listen, truly listen to its tale. It's the beating heart of a mystery that pulses with the rhythm of forgotten millennia. As we continue this journey, we'll delve deeper into the nature of these antediluvian rulers. We'll explore what other ancient texts might corroborate or illuminate this incredible narrative. We'll ask how such a society could have functioned, and what implications it holds for our understanding of human potential, or perhaps human limitations. We're peeling back layers of time not just to uncover facts, but to understand a different reality. A reality where gods walked among men and kings ruled for lifetimes that dwarf our very concept of history. Are you ready to continue this exploration with me? Because the truths hidden within these ancient records are far more astonishing than any fiction. We've faced the numbers, confronted the impossible durations, and acknowledged the meticulous precision of the Sumerian scribes. You've walked with us through the ancient dust of Mesopotamia, holding the Weld-Blundell prism, and seen the stark, undeniable evidence. 200 years of rule, compressed into the lives of just 8 kings. 8 rulers whose reigns dwarf all of recorded human history combined. And then, the flood. A cataclysmic event that cleaved time in two, drawing a line in the sands of Sumerian memory. A line that says, everything changed here. Before the flood, kingship descended from heaven. After the flood, kingship descended from heaven a second time. But the nature of that kingship and the beings who held it was fundamentally different. This isn't just a detail, is it? It's the beating heart of the mystery, a phrase that pulses with profound implications, echoing across millennia. What does it mean for kingship to descend from heaven? We're not talking about a metaphorical divine right, are we? Not in the context of beings who live for tens of thousands of years. The Sumerians, remember, were intensely practical. Their records, their laws, their astronomical observations, they were grounded in a reality they perceived. So when they tell us kingship descended from heaven, are we truly to believe they meant anything less than a literal, physical arrival? Imagine, if you will, the scene. Not just a concept, but an event. Beings, perhaps unlike anything we know, arriving from above, bringing with them the very blueprint for organized society, for governance, for kingship. This isn't some abstract theological concept. This is a Genesis event, a beginning point for civilization itself, explicitly linked to an extraterrestrial origin. You see it, don't you? The Sumerian King List isn't just a dry historical document. It's a foundational text, a creation narrative disguised as a king list. It posits that the very idea of rulership, the very structure of societal order, was not an organic evolution of early humans, but a gift, or perhaps an imposition, from beings who were not of this earth. They came down. They brought kingship. And for an unimaginable span of time they ruled. These antediluvian kings, Alulim, Alulgar, Enmenluana, and the others, they weren't just long-lived humans. They were something else entirely. Perhaps they were the very architects, the overseers of early humanity. Their impossible longevity wasn't a quirk of nature, but a reflection of their true nature, their non-human essence. They were the original teachers, the guides, the ones who laid the groundwork for what would become Sumerian civilization. Think about the sheer scale of their reigns. Alulim, ruling for 28 to 800 years. What kind of civilization would exist under such a constant, unwavering hand? What kind of knowledge could accumulate? What kind of progress could be made when the leadership remained unchanged for longer than modern human history? It paints a picture of an era unlike anything we can fully grasp. A golden age, perhaps, where the wisdom of the ages was not lost with each successive generation of rulers, but accumulated, refined and perfected by the same ancient minds. This era before the flood was fundamentally different. The very fabric of existence, it seems, allowed for such monumental lifespans. Was the atmosphere different? Was the planet itself attuned to a different rhythm? Or was it simply that these beings, descended from heaven, were not subject to the same biological constraints as terrestrial life? The King List doesn't just record history. It hints at a lost cosmology, a forgotten understanding of how the world truly worked, and who truly built it. And then came the flood. The King List is unequivocal. It marks this event with chilling clarity. Then the flood swept over. Not just a heavy rain, not just a local deluge, but the flood. A global cataclysm that brought an end to that era, wiping the slate clean and irrevocably altering the course of existence. What did the flood signify beyond mere destruction? We've already noted the drastic reduction in rain lengths post-flood. This isn't coincidence. It implies a fundamental change, a severing of the connection to that original heavenly lineage. Or perhaps a transformation of the beings themselves. Did the flood diminish their power? Did it force them to adapt, to become more human in their lifespans? Or did it simply mark the end of their direct physical rule, ushering in an era where their descendants, now diminished, took the reins? The phrase kingship descended from heaven a second time is crucial here. It suggests a re-establishment, a restart. But it's a restart under profoundly different conditions. The reigns that follow, while still long by our standards, Gilgamesh at 126 years for example, are no longer in the realm of the truly impossible. They've shifted into a zone that, while extraordinary, begins to touch the edges of what we might consider human potential albeit ancient, robust human potential. So we have two distinct eras of kingship separated by a global cataclysm, and both explicitly linked to an origin from heaven. The first characterized by impossibly long reigns, hinting at non-human, perhaps divine or extraterrestrial rulers. The second still impressive, but now within a more recognizable, albeit still ancient, human scale. This is the truth embedded within the Sumerian King List. Not a myth to be dismissed, but a deliberate record of a profound reality. A reality that tells us humanity's origins, and the origins of civilization, are not as simple or as earthly as we've been led to believe. And this, my friend, is where the "they tried to hide" part truly begins to resonate. If the earliest foundational texts of human civilization explicitly state that our initial rulers and the very concept of kingship came from elsewhere, from heaven on, and ruled for durations that defy our understanding of human biology, then what does that do to our established narratives? What does it do to our understanding of human evolution, of religion, of our place in the cosmos? Such a truth would shake the very foundations of modern thought. It would demand a radical re-evaluation of everything we think we know about our past. And perhaps, just perhaps, that is precisely why this truth has been relegated to the footnotes of history, dismissed as myth, or explained away with convenient but ultimately unsatisfying academic theories. We are not dealing with a simple archaeological find. We are confronting a paradigm shift, whispered to us by the meticulous hands of ancient scribes. They recorded what they knew to be true, etching it into clay, preserving it for those who would eventually have the courage to look beyond the surface. They left us a puzzle piece, a crucial clue, a direct witness account of humanity's beginnings. The question now is not just what happened, but why this profound narrative has been so consistently overlooked. What forces over the millennia have sought to obscure this truth, to keep this astounding record confined to the realm of academic curiosities rather than the revolutionary revelation it truly is? In the next step of our journey, we'll delve deeper into the implications of this heavenly descent. We'll explore what other ancient texts, what other whispered traditions might corroborate this astonishing Sumerian account. Because the King List, potent as it is rarely alone in its revelations. Other voices, other echoes from the deep past are waiting to be heard, ready to confirm that the truth about the Sumerian kings is far grander and far stranger than anyone ever dared to imagine. We've peered into the heart of the Sumerian King List, haven't we? We've wrestled with its impossible numbers, its stark division between a pre-flood and post-flood world, and the chillingly consistent declaration that kingship descended from heaven. And what we've found, you and I, is a narrative that refuses to be neatly categorized, a truth that seems to demand a far more radical interpretation than our modern minds are often willing to entertain. You see, the conventional explanations, scribal error, different calendars, symbolic numbers, they crumble under the weight of the evidence. The Sumerian scribes were meticulous. Their understanding of time was precise. And the sudden dramatic shift in reign lengths after the flood swept over isn't a change in how they recorded history. It's a change in history itself. It's a cosmic dividing line, a reset button pressed on the very nature of existence. So if we take the King List literally, if we allow ourselves to truly consider what it's telling us, then we must confront the staggering implication. The antediluvian kings, those 8 rulers who governed for a mind-boggling 200 years, were not human. They couldn't have been. Their longevity, their immense wisdom, their very origin, descended from heaven, points to something else entirely. Something divine, something extraterrestrial, something utterly beyond our current understanding of human potential. But is this just a quirk of Sumerian mythology? A singular, isolated anomaly in the ancient world? Or do echoes of this profound pre-flood reality resonate through other ancient traditions, other sacred texts, whispering the same impossible truth? This is where the journey gets even more intriguing, because the Sumerian King List, as revolutionary as it is, doesn't stand alone. Far from it. When we cast our gaze across the ancient world, we find striking, undeniable parallels that begin to weave a much larger tapestry of a forgotten past. Think with me about the Epic of Gilgamesh, a monumental work of Mesopotamian literature, one of the oldest surviving great works of fiction, yet deeply rooted in history and myth. While Gilgamesh himself is a post-flood king, albeit one whose own reign is still listed at an extraordinary 126 years in some versions of the King List, his epic journey is fundamentally about confronting mortality, about seeking an immortality that he believes once existed. And who does he seek out in his desperate quest for eternal life? None other than Utnapishtim, the sole survivor of the Great Flood, a man granted immortality by the gods. Utnapishtim is a direct link to that antediluvian world, a living testament to a time when life and the rules governing it were fundamentally different. He remembers the world before the deluge, a world where beings lived for unimaginable durations. Gilgamesh's very quest, his yearning for a lost form of existence, subtly reinforces the idea that an age of extreme longevity wasn't just a fantasy, it was a memory, a powerful legend echoing a stark reality. But the parallels don't stop in Mesopotamia. They stretch across continents and cultures, reaching into the very foundations of Western civilization. And perhaps nowhere are they more startlingly clear than in one of the most widely read and revered texts in human history, the Book of Genesis. Turn with me to the early chapters of Genesis, to the genealogies that precede the Great Flood. What do we find there? A list of patriarchs whose lifespans defy all human experience, yet are presented as historical fact. Adam lived 930 years, Seth lived 912 years, Enosh lived 905 years, Kenan lived 910 years, Mahalalel lived 85 years, Jared lived 982 years. Enoch, who walked with God and was taken, lived 3 years before his disappearance. Methuselah, the longest lived, reached an astonishing 969 years. And Noah, the man who built the ark and survived the flood, lived 950 years in total, with 100 of those occurring before the deluge. Are you seeing the pattern here? The striking, almost unsettling similarity? Just like the Sumerian King List, Genesis presents a pre-flood world where individuals, particularly those in positions of lineage and authority, lived for extraordinarily long periods, hundreds, nearly 1,000 years. And then, what happens after the flood? Dramatic, unmistakable reduction in lifespan. Noah's sons live into their hundreds, but their descendants see their years steadily diminish. Abraham lives 75 years. Moses lives 20 years. Soon human lifespans settle into the familiar 70 years and 10 or 80 years for the strong, as the Bible itself describes. This isn't just a coincidence. This isn't just a random cultural quirk. We have 2 foundational texts from distinct but geographically proximate cultures, both describing an age of profound longevity, before a catastrophic global flood, followed by a dramatic decrease in lifespans after it. Both narratives are steeped in the concept of a divine intervention, a descent of power or knowledge, and a subsequent reset of the world. What are the chances of such a precise, consistent narrative pattern emerging independently if it weren't reflecting some shared, deeply embedded memory or a common, ancient source of information. It suggests a universal truth, a global tradition of a pre-flood age where beings, whether called kings, patriarchs, or something else entirely, lived for durations that now seem utterly mythical. And let's circle back to that phrase from the Sumerian King List, the one that anchors our entire investigation. Kingship descended from heaven. What does it mean when we couple it with these incredible lifespans and the parallels in other ancient texts? It implies not just a divine mandate for kingship, but a divine origin for the kings themselves. These weren't just men chosen by gods, these were beings from the heavens. Those who from heaven to earth came, as some ancient texts might be interpreted. We're talking about beings with a fundamentally different biological makeup, a superior understanding of the cosmos, and perhaps even advanced technologies that allowed them to establish and maintain civilization in its earliest, most rudimentary forms. They weren't just rulers, they were architects, teachers, perhaps even genetic progenitors. Imagine, if you will, a time when humanity was in its infancy, struggling to grasp the most basic concepts of organization, agriculture, and governance. And then, beings of immense wisdom, power, and extraordinary longevity arrive. They establish order, they impart knowledge, they rule. Their presence would be nothing short of miraculous. Their reign lengths a testament to their non-human nature, their descent from heaven, not a metaphor but a literal description of their arrival. This isn't some fringe conspiracy theory we're dabbling in. We are simply taking ancient texts at their word, following the logical implications of their explicit statements. We're allowing the Sumerian scribes, those meticulous record keepers, to tell us their story without imposing our modern biases and preconceived notions. We're acknowledging that what they recorded, with such precision and consistency, might just be the literal truth. The hidden truth, then, isn't just about the identity of a few ancient kings. It's about the very foundations of human civilization. It's about the origins of governance, knowledge, and perhaps even humanity itself. It suggests that our history as we understand it is incomplete, that a crucial mind-bending chapter has been either deliberately obscured or simply dismissed as myth. Why would this information be hidden? Why would we as a society be so resistant to accepting such a radical past? Perhaps the implications are too profound, too challenging to our sense of human uniqueness and autonomy. To admit that our earliest rulers were not of this earth, that our civilization was jump-started by beings from heaven, fundamentally alters our perception of ourselves and our place in the universe. It shakes the very bedrock of our established narratives, but the evidence you see is etched in clay, written in ancient scrolls, and echoed in the foundational myths of countless cultures. The Sumerian King List is not an outlier. It's a key, unlocking a deeper, more interconnected understanding of ancient history. It's a puzzle piece that perfectly fits with others we're now finding scattered across time and tradition. We've established the pattern. We've seen the consistent narrative across different cultures. Now the burning question becomes, who were these beings? What was their true purpose? And what happened during those 200 years of rule before the cosmic reset? The truth, my friend, is far more astonishing than you can imagine, and we're only just beginning to scratch the surface of what the Sumerians, and indeed all ancient peoples, tried to tell us. Get ready, because the revelations only deepen from here. We've journeyed through the astounding longevity of the antediluvian Sumerian kings, unravelled the deliberate precision of the scribes, and even drawn startling parallels with narratives like the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Book of Genesis. You've seen how these seemingly disparate traditions echo a singular, profound truth, a time before the Great Flood, when life, and specifically the lives of rulers, stretched to unimaginable durations. But here's where the real unravelling begins, where we pull at the threads of a tapestry woven with both history and cosmic mystery. We've established that the sheer consistency across these ancient accounts makes it impossible to simply dismiss them as fanciful myths or numerical errors. The Sumerian King List isn't just a dry historical document, it's a deliberate declaration, a foundational statement about the very nature of kingship and, by extension, the origins of our civilization. Remember that crucial phrase, kingship descended from heaven. It's not a throwaway line, it's the beating heart of this entire mystery, a phrase that demands our full attention, a puzzle piece that, once properly placed, reconfigures our entire understanding of the ancient world. What does it truly mean for kingship to descend from heaven? For centuries, mainstream academia has sidestepped this, often reducing it to a poetic metaphor for divine appointment, a king chosen by the gods. So far, so normal, right? But what if the Sumerian scribes, those meticulous record keepers, those precise chroniclers of time and events, meant something far more literal? What if heaven wasn't just a spiritual realm, but a place, a source, an origin point that we, in our modern understanding, have conveniently chosen to ignore? Imagine for a moment that these scribes, writing on clay tablets thousands of years ago, possessed a knowledge that we have lost, or perhaps had taken from us. When they inscribed kingship descended from heaven, they weren't just talking about a blessing, they were talking about a source. And if the source of kingship was heaven, then the kings themselves, especially those antediluvian rulers like Ululim and Alalga, must have been intrinsically linked to that origin. Their impossible lifespans, their reigns stretching for tens of thousands of years, suddenly begin to make a terrifying, exhilarating kind of sense. If these kings were merely human, even extraordinary ones, their longevity defies every biological and historical norm we understand. But if they were from heaven, if their essence was fundamentally different, then their extended existence becomes not a bizarre anomaly, but a logical consequence of their very nature. We are talking about beings who are not purely terrestrial, perhaps not even purely biological as we understand it. We are talking about the architects, the overseers, the creators of early civilization who, quite literally, came from somewhere else. This is where the truth they tried to hide truly begins to surface. For if kingship descended from heaven, and these kings were not human in the conventional sense, then the very foundations of Sumerian civilization, arguably the cradle of all human civilization, were not laid by humans alone. They were guided, initiated, and perhaps even engineered by entities whose origins were celestial. Think about the incredible advancements of Sumer, the invention of writing, cuneiform, the wheel, sophisticated irrigation systems, monumental architecture, advanced mathematics, astronomy, and complex legal codes. These weren't gradual developments over millennia, but rather an explosive blossoming of knowledge and technology in a relatively short period. Mainstream historians often marvel at this Sumerian miracle, struggling to explain how such a complex society could emerge so rapidly from what was supposedly a primitive past. But what if it wasn't a miracle of human ingenuity alone? What if these heavenly kings, with their impossibly long reigns, were the ones providing the blueprints? What if they were the teachers, the engineers, the guides who jump-started human civilization, bringing with them knowledge and technology far beyond what early humans could have possibly conceived on their own? Consider the sheer scale of their rule. Ululim and Alalga, reigning for 28,836,000 years respectively. That's not just a long reign, That's an entire epoch. If a single being ruled for such an immense period, they would have witnessed countless generations of humans, observed their development, guided their progress, and implemented long-term plans that spanned millennia. This isn't governance as we know it. This is planetary stewardship. This is the deliberate shaping of a nascent civilization. You see, the Sumerian King List isn't just listing rulers. It's outlining a foundational period when humanity was not alone in its development. It hints at a time when we were under the direct tutelage of beings whose origins were not earthly. And the flood swept over isn't just a natural disaster, it's the demarcation line, the cosmic reset that fundamentally altered this dynamic. After the flood, when kingship descended from heaven a second time, things were different. The reigns, while still long by our standards, were dramatically shorter. They progressively diminished, eventually aligning with human lifespans. This isn't just a change in numbers, it's a profound shift in the very nature of kingship, mirroring a fundamental change in the nature of life itself on Earth. What happened? Did the heavenly beings leave? Did their direct influence diminish? Was humanity left to its own devices, with only the memory of these ancient, long-lived rulers to guide them? The King List itself suggests a break, a rupture in the cosmic order. The first descent of kingship brought forth beings of immense longevity and direct, sustained oversight. The second descent, post-flood, brought kings whose lifespans, while still sometimes extended, were a fraction of their antediluvian predecessors. It's as if the direct umbilical cord to heaven had been severed, or at least significantly attenuated. This radical interpretation challenges the very core of our accepted historical narratives. It asks us to consider that the stories we dismiss as myths, tales of gods walking among men, of divine intervention in human affairs, of knowledge imparted from celestial beings, might actually be deeply encoded historical records. The Sumerian scribes, in their meticulous, deliberate way, were not just recording history, they were encoding a cosmic truth, a truth about our origins that has been systematically marginalized, reinterpreted, or simply forgotten. Why would this truth be hidden? Perhaps because it fundamentally alters our perception of humanity's place in the universe. If we were guided, if we were taught, if our civilization was seeded by beings from heaven, then the narrative of humanity as a self-made species, alone in the cosmos, begins to crumble. It opens up profound questions about our purpose, our destiny, and our true lineage. The implications are staggering. If these kings were indeed non-terrestrial, or at least a different order of being, then the Sumerian King List becomes not just a list of rulers, but a historical account of an ancient, perhaps even extraterrestrial stewardship of early humanity. It's a record of a time when the veil between heaven and earth was thinner, when the cosmic architects were directly involved in the construction of human society. We're not talking about a fringe conspiracy theory here. We're talking about taking ancient texts, written by highly educated and respected scribes at their literal word. We are daring to ask, what if they weren't speaking in metaphor, but in plain albeit profound fact? What if the gods of Sumer, the Anunnaki, were not just mythical deities, but the very heavenly beings who descended to establish kingship and guide humanity? The resistance to this idea is understandable. It requires a complete paradigm shift, a willingness to re-examine everything we think we know about human origins and ancient history. It means accepting that our conventional understanding might be incomplete, perhaps even deliberately curated to omit a crucial chapter of our past. The Sumerian King List, in its stark, uncompromising detail, stands as a testament to this forgotten era. It's a primary source document, not a speculative text, and it tells us unequivocally that before the flood, kingship came from heaven, And these kings ruled for durations that defy human comprehension. This isn't just a coincidence, a scribal error, or a symbolic flourish. This is a deliberate, precise record of a time when our world was fundamentally different, governed by beings whose origins and nature challenge everything we believe about our place in the universe. Are you starting to feel the weight of this truth? Are you beginning to see how deeply ingrained this narrative is across cultures and across time? We're not just exploring ancient history, we're uncovering a foundational truth about humanity itself, a truth that has been waiting patiently in the clay tablets, whispering across millennia for us to finally hear. And the deeper we dig, the more insistent that whisper becomes, urging us to question, to reconsider, to finally acknowledge the profound implications of kingship that descended from heaven. The waters receded, the world reborn, yet irrevocably changed. You've journeyed with us through the impossible spans of the antediluvian kings, those titans who ruled for tens of thousands of years, whose very existence challenges our fundamental understanding of history. We've explored the profound statement, kingship descended from heaven, not as metaphor, but as a literal declaration of origin, of non-human beings seeding civilization on Earth. And then, the Great Flood, a cataclysm that wasn't just a geological event, but a cosmic reset, a line drawn in the primordial sands of time. Now, we stand at the precipice of its aftermath, and the Sumerian King List, that relentless chronicler of truth, offers another astonishing detail. After the deluge, it declares, kingship descended from heaven a second time. Think about that for a moment. A second time. This isn't just a simple restart. This isn't merely picking up where things left off. If the first descent brought beings of impossible longevity, what did the second one usher in? And why, you might ask, is this distinction so vitally important? Look closely at the list again, and the answer, stark and undeniable, stares back at us from the clay tablets. The reigns of the post-flood kings are dramatically, shockingly different. No longer do we see rulers presiding for 36,000 years, or 28 the 800, or even 1800. Instead, the numbers plummet. Kings like Etana of Kish, who ruled after the flood, are credited with 150 years. Still immense by human standards, perhaps, but a mere fraction of his antediluvian predecessors. Then comes Bale, with 400 years, followed by Enmenuna with 60, and so on. The reigns continue to shorten, becoming more and more recognizable, eventually settling into durations that align with human lifespans. Decades, not millennia. What does this tell us? It's not just a quantitative change, it's a qualitative one. The very nature of kingship, and perhaps the very nature of the beings who held that kingship, underwent a profound transformation. The cosmic reset wasn't just about cleansing the earth. It was about recalibrating the relationship between the heavenly architects and the fledgling humanity they had fostered. Imagine, if you will, a grand experiment. Phase 1, direct, extended oversight by beings whose very lifespans were alien to our understanding. They arrived, they taught, they built, they ruled. They were the visible, tangible embodiment of heavenly authority, their immense longevity a testament to their non-human essence. They were the guiding hands, the literal kings from the stars. This was the era before the flood. Then came the deluge, a punctuation mark of unimaginable scale. And when the waters receded, the King List tells us, kingship descended from heaven a second time. But this time it was different. This time the direct, unmediated presence of the hyper-long-lived rulers seems to have ceased. So if kingship still descended from heaven, But the kings were no longer living for tens of thousands of years. What exactly descended? This is where the mystery deepens, where the hidden truth begins to reveal its intricate layers. We propose that what descended was not necessarily the same type of being, or at least not in the same capacity of direct eternal rule. Instead, it was the mandate, the authority, the system of governance itself, still divinely sanctioned, still emanating from the heavens, but now perhaps delegated. Consider this: the heavenly beings, the architects of early civilization, did not simply abandon humanity after the flood. The King List explicitly states their continued involvement through the second descent, but instead of ruling directly, they may have established an intermediary system. They bestowed the right to rule, the concept of kingship, upon human leaders who would then govern for more conventional human durations. These human kings, though mortal, would still rule by divine right, their authority stemming directly from the heavenly source. This explains the dramatic reduction in reign lengths. The human kings were indeed human, subject to human lifespans, but the institution of kingship, the idea that a ruler's legitimacy came from above, from the same heavenly source that birthed the antediluvian kings, remained intact. It was a subtle yet profound shift, a transition from direct divine rule to divinely appointed human rule. You see, the Sumerian scribes, in their meticulous record-keeping, are not just giving us a list of names and numbers. They are charting an evolutionary path of governance, a chronicle of humanity's relationship with its cosmic patrons. They are telling us that even after the flood, even after the direct presence of the hyper-long-lived kings faded, the connection to heaven was not severed, it was merely reconfigured. This second descent is a critical puzzle piece. It tells us that the heavenly beings were still very much involved, still orchestrating, still guiding, but from a different vantage point. Perhaps they had completed the initial phase of direct instruction and oversight. Perhaps humanity, having survived the cataclysm, was now deemed ready for a different kind of stewardship, one where they would learn to govern themselves, albeit under a divine mandate. Think of the implications for human civilization. Before the flood, our ancestors lived under the direct, constant presence of these immensely powerful, long-lived entities. Their wisdom, their technology, their very presence would have been a foundational aspect of daily life. Post-flood, with human kings now at the helm, there would have been a new dynamic. The direct, immediate access to divine wisdom might have been attenuated, leading to a greater reliance on human ingenuity, human decision-making, and human fallibility. This doesn't mean the heavenly beings disappeared entirely. Far from it. The persistent idea of divine kingship throughout ancient Mesopotamia, and indeed across countless cultures, is a testament to this enduring legacy. Kings were chosen by the gods, their legitimacy derived from a higher power. This wasn't some abstract philosophical concept, it was a direct echo of the Sumerian King List's pronouncements. The very foundation of earthly power, even after the flood, was rooted in that initial descent from heaven. So the question that burns now is, why the shift? Why did these beings, who ruled for such unimaginable durations, transition to a system of delegated human rule after the flood? Was it a deliberate step in humanity's development, a test, a new phase of their grand design? Or was it a consequence of the flood itself, an event that perhaps impacted even these heavenly architects, forcing a change in their mode of interaction with our world? This is where the truth they try to hide becomes even more poignant. The reduction in lifespan, the transition from direct rule to delegated authority, these aren't random occurrences, they are deliberate choices, actions taken by the heavenly beings and meticulously recorded by the Sumerian scribes. The scribes, in their precision, were not just documenting history, they were documenting a plan, a purpose. What does this profound shift in governance tell us about the intentions of these beings? Were they benevolent overseers, gradually empowering humanity to stand on its own? Or was there another motive, a more complex agenda at play? The very act of stepping back, of allowing human kings to rule, while still retaining the ultimate source of authority, speaks volumes about their continued influence, even when less visible. This is not merely a change in administrative policy, it's a fundamental alteration in the very fabric of existence on Earth, a redefinition of the relationship between the divine and the mortal. The Sumerian King List, in its stark enumeration of reign lengths, is not just a historical document, it's a profound theological and cosmological statement. It's telling us that our origins are not as simple as we've been led to believe, and that the powers that shaped our earliest civilizations were not only real but also dynamic, adapting their methods, guiding us through millennia with an agenda we are only now beginning to uncover. The second descent of kingship isn't an end to the mystery, it's a portal to a deeper one. What was the reason for this monumental shift? What did humanity gain, and what did it lose, when the direct presence of the hyper-long-lived kings gave way to their divinely appointed human successors? And what does this entire saga reveal about the ultimate purpose of those who first brought kingship from heaven, not once but twice? These are the questions that compel us forward as we continue our journey into the hidden truths of the Sumerian King List. We've journeyed through the staggering numbers, the impossible durations, and the cosmic declaration of kingship descended from heaven. We've seen how the Sumerian King List, far from being a simple historical record, unfurls a tapestry of ancient memory that echoes across cultures, from the Epic of Gilgamesh to the venerable pages of Genesis. You've grappled with the implications of a great flood, a cataclysmic reset that cleaved history into a before and after, and the profound shift in the nature of rule that followed. But now you're asking the inevitable question, aren't you? The one that hangs heavy in the air, a whisper carried on the ancient Mesopotamian winds. Who were they? Who were these beings from whom kingship descended, not once but twice? Who were the architects of this astonishingly rapid civilization, these long-lived overseers who seemed to guide humanity through its infancy? This isn't just about a list of names and numbers anymore, is it? This is about the very foundation of human history, about the origins of our civilization, and about the intelligence that sparked it all. And to truly begin to unravel this, we must turn our gaze deeper into the heart of Sumerian belief, into the very pantheon they revered. You see, the Sumerians weren't shy about attributing their advancements, their knowledge, and indeed their very existence to a group of powerful beings they called the Anunnaki. Does that name ring a bell? It should. It's a name that has stirred debate, ignited theories, and fascinated seekers of truth for decades. But for the Sumerians, these were not abstract deities floating in some distant heaven. They were real. They were present. They were the ones who held the reins of power, the ones who decreed fates, and the ones who descended from heaven. The term Anunnaki itself is deeply significant. It translates broadly to those who from heaven to earth came. Stop right there. Let that sink in. Those who from heaven to earth came. Does that sound familiar? It resonates with the very phrase etched onto the weld Blundell prism, the beating heart of our mystery. Kingship descended from heaven. It's not a coincidence. It's a direct linguistic and conceptual bridge. The kingship, the authority, the very essence of governance that arrived on earth was inherently tied to these beings, the Anunnaki. So when the King List declares that Alulim and Alalgar ruled for impossible durations before the flood and that their kingship descended from heaven, we are not talking about human monarchs in the way we understand them today. We are talking about the Anunnaki themselves, or at the very least, their direct, hyper-long-lived representatives, chosen and perhaps even genetically engineered to manage this nascent human experiment. Think about it. The Sumerians weren't just worshipping gods, they were recording a history of stewardship. These Anunnaki, these heavenly ones, are depicted in countless cuneiform texts as not merely creators, but as active participants in the daily life and grand trajectory of early humanity. They established cities, they taught agriculture, they dictated laws, and they organized society. They weren't just figures to pray to, they were the doers, the engineers, the governors. And what was their ultimate purpose in seeding and guiding early human civilization? This is where the Sumerian creation myths become profoundly illuminating. You see, according to their ancient narratives, humanity wasn't just a happy accident. We were, in essence, a solution. The Anunnaki, it is said, initially had to toil for their existence. They dug canals, they built infrastructure, they laboured, but eventually they grew weary. So, a decision was made by the elder gods, led by figures like Enlil and Enki, create a subservient race to bear the burden of their work. This is the birth of Lulu Amalu, the primitive worker or man. Fashioned from clay and imbued with the essence of a god, humanity was brought into being to serve, not as slaves in a cruel, oppressive sense, but as partners in the grand project of maintaining order and providing for the heavenly ones. And who better to oversee this monumental project, this long-term endeavour of cultivating and civilizing a new species, than beings whose lifespan stretched for tens of thousands of years? The pre-flood kings, therefore, weren't just kings. They were the supreme managers, the direct liaison between the Anunnaki Council and the burgeoning human populations. Their impossible longevity wasn't a quirk, it was a necessity. Imagine trying to establish a civilization, teach complex agricultural techniques, introduce writing, and lay the foundations for cities with rulers who last only 70 years. It would be an exercise in futility. No, for a project of such scale and ambition, you needed continuity, stability, and an immense depth of accumulated experience that only beings with such extended lifespans could possess. They were the long-term planners, the consistent guides, the steady hands on the tiller of early human evolution. Then came the Great Flood, the cosmic reset. We've explored its devastating impact, its role as a great divider in history. But what was its deeper meaning for the Anunnaki? Was it simply a destructive act? Or was it a recalibration, a judgment, a profound shift in their strategy for managing humanity? The texts suggest a complex narrative here. Some stories speak of the Anunnaki growing displeased with humanity's noise, their proliferation, or perhaps their deviation from the intended path. Others hint at internal disputes among the Anunnaki themselves regarding humanity's fate. Regardless of the specific motivation, the flood wasn't just a natural disaster. It was an event orchestrated or permitted by these very heavenly beings. And after the waters receded, after the world was cleansed, kingship descended from heaven a second time. But this time something was different. The reigns were dramatically shorter, still long by human standards initially, but progressively decreasing until they settled into lifespans we recognize. What does this signify? It suggests a fundamental change in the Anunnaki's mode of interaction. Perhaps humanity, having survived the cataclysm, had reached a new level of maturity, a point where direct, hyper-long-lived oversight was no longer deemed necessary. Or perhaps the flood itself was a lesson, a severe pruning of the human population, after which the Anunnaki decided to step back, to delegate authority more directly to human kings, albeit kings still deriving their legitimacy and wisdom from the heavenly source. The post-flood kings, therefore, became intermediaries. They were still chosen, still divinely sanctioned, still imbued with a special connection to the Anunnaki, but they were now human. The direct physical presence of the hyper-long-lived heavenly rulers receded, giving way to a system of delegated governance. The blueprints had been laid, the foundational knowledge imparted, and now humanity was tasked with building upon it, under the watchful though less direct gaze of the Anunnaki. It's a transition from direct management to a more indirect form of mentorship, a shift from primary architects to project supervisors. So the King List, with its impossible numbers and its stark division by the flood, isn't just a record of kings, it's a chronicle of humanity's evolving relationship with its creators, its guides, its heavenly overseers. It tells a story of direct intervention, a cataclysmic judgment, and then a strategic withdrawal, leaving humanity with the tools, the knowledge, and the divine mandate to govern itself, albeit under an enduring celestial shadow. This narrative, if embraced, shatters our conventional understanding of history. It challenges the bedrock of evolutionary theory and the self-contained trajectory of human development. It suggests that our origins are not solely terrestrial, and that the spark of civilization was ignited by an intelligence far beyond our current comprehension. And this brings us to the final haunting question: why has this truth been hidden? Why has this profound history, meticulously recorded by the very people who lived it, been relegated to the realm of myth, dismissed as fanciful exaggeration, or simply overlooked in our pursuit of a more palatable, more anthropocentric narrative? Is it because the implications are too vast, too paradigm-shifting for the established structures of power and belief to accommodate? Imagine a world where humanity openly acknowledged a non-human, extraterrestrial origin for its civilization. What would that do to our religions, our sciences, our sense of unique self-importance? Perhaps the hiding wasn't a deliberate conspiracy in the modern sense, but a gradual obscuring, a collective amnesia, or even a deliberate reinterpretation by later powers who sought to consolidate their own authority by severing humanity's direct link to these heavenly ancestors. The Sumerian scribes, those meticulous record keepers, laid out the truth for us to find. They inscribed it on clay, they preserved it through millennia, knowing that one day, perhaps, we would be ready to truly understand. And now you, the reader, are standing on the precipice of that understanding. We are not just decoding ancient texts, we are unearthing a forgotten chapter of human existence, a chapter that promises to redefine everything we thought we knew about where we come from and perhaps where we are going. We've identified the who, the Anunnaki, or their direct representatives. We've explored their purpose, the stewardship and guidance of nascent humanity. We've begun to understand the why of the post-flood shift, a recalibration, a delegation of authority. But the journey is far from over, because if these beings were real, if they truly guided our earlier steps, then the remnants of their influence, their technology, their wisdom, must still be embedded within the very fabric of our ancient world. And that, my friend, is where our next exploration will take us, into the physical evidence, the astonishing artifacts, and the enigmatic structures that whisper of a knowledge far beyond what primitive humans should have possessed. We're about to look for the fingerprints of the Anunnaki themselves. After the Great Flood, that cosmic reset, the world you knew was gone, the slate wiped clean. But the Sumerian King List, our meticulous guide, doesn't end there. Oh no, it continues, picking up the thread of history with a phrase that echoes like a divine decree. After the flood had swept over, and when kingship had descended from heaven a second time. Think about that for a moment. A second time. It's not just a continuation, it's a reinitiation. It tells us that the very concept of kingship, the authority, the structure, the mandate to rule is not an invention of humanity. It's a gift, or perhaps a burden bestowed from beyond. Before the flood, we saw the hyper-long reigns, the impossibly ancient beings who walked among us, directly governing for millennia. Their presence was palpable, their rule absolute and seemingly eternal. But now, post-deluge, something fundamental has shifted. You see the immediate, undeniable evidence in the numbers. The kings who rule after the flood are still attributed with impressive, even mythical durations in the early post-flood period, reigns of hundreds, sometimes even 1,000 years. But never again do we see the tens of thousands, the hundreds of thousands of years attributed to the pre-flood dynasts. Never again do we encounter figures like Alulim or Alalgar, whose epoch stretched beyond human comprehension. The scale has been recalibrated drastically, profoundly. This isn't merely a change in the length of a king's rule, it's a change in the nature of kingship itself. It's a fundamental alteration in the relationship between the heavenly benefactors, or architects, depending on your perspective, and the human population they oversaw. If the pre-flood kings were the Anunnaki, or their direct, long-lived representatives, what does this second descent imply? Are the same beings still involved, but now operating under a new protocol? Or have they delegated their authority, stepping back from direct, physical governance to a more enigmatic supervisory role? We are looking at nothing less than the birth of human-centric leadership, albeit one still rooted in a non-terrestrial mandate. The kingship still descends from heaven, carrying with it the divine sanction, the celestial authority. But now it descends upon human beings. This is the crucial pivot, the moment humanity is given the reins, even if those reins are still guided by unseen hands. Imagine the world after the flood. Chaos, desolation, a scattered and traumatized humanity. Who would rise to lead? How would order be re-established? The Sumerian King List provides the answer. The same source that initiated civilization before the flood steps in again. But this time they don't become the kings. They appoint them. They bestow the divine right, the me, the cosmic laws and decrees that govern civilization, upon human leaders. This is stewardship redefined. It's a transition from direct management to delegated authority. The heavenly beings, whoever and whatever they were, are no longer the shepherds who physically walk among the flock, guiding every step. Instead, they are the distant, watchful overseers, selecting human shepherds, empowering them with a divine spark and allowing them to lead. Consider the first post-flood dynasty, the dynasty of Kish. Its kings still reign for hundreds of years. Enmenuna, Melemana, Barsalnuna. These names echo from the depths of time, their reign still far beyond what we consider normal human lifespans. This suggests a transitional phase, doesn't it? Perhaps the immediate post-flood human kings were still imbued with some form of enhanced longevity, a residual gift from their non-terrestrial patrons, or perhaps they were exceptionally long-lived individuals chosen for their unique qualities and direct connection to the heavenly source. But as the list progresses, as time stretches further from the cataclysm, you watch those reign lengths steadily diminish. Slowly, inexorably, they begin to align with what we recognize as human lifespans. This isn't a sudden, jarring cut-off. It's a gradual tapering, a slow descent from the mythical to the historical. It's almost as if the heavenly architects are progressively withdrawing, allowing humanity to stand more firmly on its own 2 feet, yet always with the understanding that the ultimate authority, the origin of kingship, remains celestial. So what does this profound shift tell us about the purpose of these beings? Why the change in approach? Perhaps the flood itself was not just a destructive event, but a reset for both humanity and the gods. Maybe the direct, millennia-long rule was a necessary phase of initiation, a time when humanity needed constant hands-on guidance to establish the foundational elements of civilization: agriculture, writing, law, social structure. But once those foundations were laid, once humanity had reached a certain level of development, the direct rule became less necessary, or even counterproductive. Could it be that the heavenly beings were testing humanity, guiding us through infancy, then adolescence, and finally after the flood, setting us on a path toward maturity, albeit under their continued watchful eye? The shift from direct governance to delegated authority could represent a profound evolution in their grand plan for humanity. It suggests a belief in our capacity for self-governance, a recognition that we were ready for a new phase of development, even if we still needed the divine mandate to legitimize our rulers and maintain cosmic order. This isn't about human kings simply inventing the idea of monarchy. No, the Sumerian King List is emphatic. Kingship descended from heaven. It's a bestowed institution, a divine gift. And even when human beings take the throne, the source of their power, the legitimacy of their rule, remains rooted in that non-terrestrial origin. This is the hidden truth that continues to reverberate through history, challenging our most fundamental assumptions. Think about it. Every king, every emperor, every ruler who claimed divine right throughout history, from the pharaohs of Egypt to the Roman emperors to medieval European monarchs, they were all echoing, perhaps unknowingly, this ancient Sumerian principle. The idea that authority flows from a higher, non-human source is not some fringe belief. It is the beating heart of ancient political theology. And the Sumerian King List gives us the ultimate origin story for this concept. Direct, physical intervention from heavenly beings. The scribes who meticulously etched these names and numbers onto clay, they weren't just recording history, they were preserving a profound cosmic narrative. They understood that the lineage of kingship, even in its post-flood human-centric form, was a direct continuation of a non-terrestrial legacy. They weren't trying to hide the truth, they were recording it for posterity, for those who had the eyes to see and the minds to comprehend. But why has this truth been so consistently overlooked, dismissed, or reinterpreted by modern scholarship? Why do we struggle so much with the literal interpretation of kingship descended from heaven, when the Sumerians themselves, renowned for their precision and literal record-keeping, laid it out so clearly? Perhaps it's because this truth is too unsettling, too disruptive to our established narratives of human evolution, religion, and our place in the cosmos. It implies that our earliest civilizations were not solely the product of human ingenuity, but were seeded and guided by an intelligence from beyond our world. It suggests that our history, our very understanding of what it means to be human, is incomplete, missing a crucial non-terrestrial chapter. As we move forward, we must hold on to this understanding of the post-flood shift. It's not a dismissal of the heavenly beings, it's a recalibration of their interaction with humanity. They haven't vanished, they've simply changed their method. And the lingering question, the one that hums beneath the surface of every inscription, is: what was their ultimate purpose in initiating and then guiding human civilization in this way? And are they still watching? Are they still guiding? The implications, my friends, are as vast as the cosmos itself, and our journey into uncovering these truths has only just begun. We've traced the incredible arc of kingship from its descent from the heavens before the deluge, through the impossibly long reigns of the Anunnaki and their direct proxies, to the dramatic recalibration after the Great Flood. The evidence, etched into clay for millennia, speaks of a cosmic reset, a fundamental shift in the relationship between the celestial architects and their human creation. Kingship descended again from heaven, but this time the rules of engagement were different. The reign shortened, human lifespans became the norm, and the Anunnaki, while still present, receded from the forefront of daily governance. But this raises an even more profound question, doesn't it? If this profound truth that our earliest rulers were not human, that they guided us for hundreds of thousands of years, that they literally descended from the stars, is so clearly laid out in the very bedrock of human history, why have we been so steadfastly encouraged to ignore it? Why has this narrative been relegated to the realm of myth, dismissed as mere allegory, or worse, hidden in plain sight? This isn't just about a historical oversight, you see. This is about a deliberate obfuscation, a carefully constructed veil drawn over a truth so monumental it would redefine everything we think we know about ourselves. Who benefits from humanity forgetting its true origins? Who profits from us believing we clawed our way out of the mud, alone and unaided, when the evidence suggests a guiding hand, a grand design from the very beginning? Think about it. The Sumerian scribes were not idle storytellers. They were meticulous record keepers, their cuneiform tablets documenting everything from grain yields to legal codes with astonishing precision. Would such a culture suddenly invent fantastical reign lengths for its earliest rulers, only to then transition to perfectly plausible human durations for later kings? It simply doesn't compute. These scribes, operating within the most sophisticated civilization of their time, were recording what they understood to be fact. They were preserving a legacy, a lineage, and a foundational truth for future generations. So if they were so careful, why did we lose the thread? After the flood, the Anunnaki didn't simply abandon humanity. Their mission, their grand design, was far from complete. Instead, their influence shifted. Imagine a master architect having laid the foundations and built the initial framework of a magnificent city, stepping back to allow skilled foremen to manage the daily construction, while still overseeing the grand plan from a higher vantage point. That, in essence, is what transpired. The Anunnaki transitioned from direct, physical governance to a more subtle, yet equally powerful form of stewardship. They delegated authority. They established lineages, choosing specific human individuals, perhaps those with particular genetic predispositions or a deeper understanding of their celestial patrons, to act as their representatives on Earth. These chosen ones became the post-flood kings, imbued with a divine right to rule. This isn't just a theological concept, it's a historical echo of the Anunnaki's original mandate. When kingship descended from heaven a second time, it wasn't a random event. It was a calculated transfer of power, a blueprint for how human civilization would be guided towards self-governance, albeit under a watchful, unseen eye. The Anunnaki provided the template, the knowledge, the divine spark that legitimized these new human rulers. Consider the rapid, almost miraculous emergence of Sumerian civilization after the flood. Within a relatively short span, we see the development of sophisticated agriculture, irrigation systems, metallurgy, monumental architecture, the wheel, writing, law codes, complex social structures, and advanced astronomy. This wasn't a slow organic evolution over tens of thousands of years, like the pre-flood era. This was an explosive leap forward, a sudden blossoming of unprecedented complexity. How do we explain this? Standard archaeological narratives struggle to fully account for such a swift and comprehensive advancement. But if we acknowledge the continued, albeit less direct influence of the Anunnaki, if we accept that they were still providing the blueprints, the advanced knowledge, the technological and organizational guidance, then this sudden flourishing makes perfect sense. They weren't just observing, they were actively facilitating humanity's ascent, pushing us towards a predetermined evolutionary path. They taught us how to build cities that defied the elements, how to organize societies on a grand scale, how to record our histories and our laws, how to harness the power of the land. These weren't lessons we stumbled upon by chance. These were gifts, carefully bestowed upon chosen human intermediaries, who then became the first true human kings, the shepherds of their people, appointed by the true shepherds from the stars. The Sumerian King List, therefore, isn't just a ledger of rulers, it's a profound narrative of this transition. It begins with the direct, long-lived divine rulers, then marks the cataclysm, and then lists the human kings who inherited the Anunnaki mandate. The diminishing reign lengths after the flood are not an error. They are a deliberate signal, a clear demarcation between the era of direct Anunnaki governance and the era of delegated human stewardship. So we come back to the question, why hide this? Why reinterpret kingship descended from heaven as merely a poetic metaphor for divine approval, rather than a literal account of extraterrestrial intervention? Perhaps, as human kings consolidated their power, they found it inconvenient to acknowledge a higher authority, an ultimate source of their power that lay beyond their control. Perhaps, over millennia, the true nature of the Anunnaki was deliberately obscured, twisted into abstract deities to prevent humanity from questioning the legitimacy of its human rulers. If the gods were distant, unknowable entities, then the kings became the indispensable intermediaries, their power unquestionable. Or perhaps the truth itself was too overwhelming, too disruptive to the developing human psyche. Imagine a world where humanity fully understood that it was not alone, that it was a creation, guided and nurtured by beings from another world. How would that impact our sense of self, our religions, our philosophies, our very understanding of freedom and destiny? Such a truth could either inspire profound wonder or provoke existential crisis on an unimaginable scale. I'm curious, what do you think? Is it easier for us to believe in a slow, undirected evolution, a random cosmic accident, than to confront the possibility of a grand design, a purposeful creation guided by intelligence beyond our current comprehension? The Sumerian King List, this incredible document, forces us to confront this discomfort. It's a puzzle piece that doesn't fit into our neat, conventional historical narratives. It challenges us to look beyond the surface, to question the accepted dogma, and to consider the profound implications of what our ancestors meticulously recorded. This isn't some fringe conspiracy theory. This is a direct reading of the primary sources. This is taking the ancient texts seriously, giving the Sumerian scribes the credit they deserve for their accuracy and their intent. They weren't just writing myths, they were documenting a history, a legacy that has been suppressed and distorted for far too long. The implications are staggering. If humanity was indeed guided by the Anunnaki, if our civilization was seeded and nurtured by these beings, what does that mean for our future? Are they still watching? Is the grand design still unfolding? And what other truths might be hidden within these ancient texts, waiting for us to finally open our eyes and truly read them? We've only just begun to peel back the layers of this extraordinary mystery, The Anunnaki's purpose, their long-term plan for humanity, and the continuing echoes of their presence are woven into the very fabric of our ancient past. And as we move forward, you and I will continue to unravel these threads, searching for the answers that have been deliberately obscured, and bringing to light the truth about the Sumerian kings they tried to hide. The journey, I assure you, only gets more intriguing from here.